hybrid meeting of Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is open to the press and public. The meeting is being broadcast live, and a recording of this meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings, and I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raise hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. May I remind members, as per statutory guide made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. Please remember to keep your microphones muted when you are not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you have been notified of your intention to speak and you have been invited to do so. Moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1. Jay, do we have any apologies?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor King-James this morning.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations with regards to today's report? Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes. Members, could you please state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes from the meeting held on the 8th of July, where the committee received the update on recommendations report and the update on external regulator recommendations report? If not, I will take them as agreed. Agenda item 4, action sheet. Rebecca, are there any outstanding actions?
Thank you, Chair. No, there are no outstanding actions from previous meetings to update members on. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 5. Before we commence discussions, I would just like to welcome Councillor David Daniels, Executive Member for Adults and Housing, and officers from the Adult Services team. Good morning to you all. And can I ask if Dave Leach, Strategic Director of Adults and Communities, or Councillor Daniels, Executive Member, would you like to give any introductions to the report before we commence?
No, I think it's probably more useful if Dave kicks off the report, to be honest.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really timely report for us, and it's quite a complex report because it's trying to do two different things, but the reason for us pulling that report together will hopefully become apparent as I give a quick introduction. Members will be aware that our county plan and our Marmot master plan are driven by that need to improve health outcomes and health equity across the borough. It's a massive driver for us, and we've brought into this committee on several occasions the data that explains why that's such a challenge and why that challenge matters to the outcomes we deliver for our residents. That work starts with our work in the community. And again, members on this committee will know we've brought previous reports in around how we're changing our system to provide that support to those groups, clubs, neighbours, shops, venues who make such an impact on our day-to-day health, making sure that everyone has the tools that they need to keep their own community healthy and to stay healthy within our own communities. And last year we created the staffing capacity to do that through our redesign work. And this year we're looking at our community commissioning and how we put investment into those communities to support that even further. Once we've got that community activity in place, the next stage in that system then is looking at targeted prevention programmes. So this is the support for individuals who are at risk of hitting one of our statutory services, one like adult social care, earlier than we would naturally expect. And again, last year we redesigned our models, our performance frameworks, our system for supporting people through targeted prevention. And the committee were heavily involved in that design process, and that was really helpful and certainly shaped the approach that we took. Once someone knows being looked after in their community, they've received all of that appropriate prevention support at the earliest stage that we can where it's required, but there's still a need for that specialist advice at the cusp of those acute services. That's when we need to make sure that our service front doors are working effectively. And that service front door in the context of adult social care is IAA, information, advice and assistance. And that's the role of that IAA team. It's crucial to make sure that people are getting the right support at the right time. And I've said a lot of times when I've spoken to the committee before that being in an acute service earlier than required does lead to inherently poorer outcomes than if we're able to support people to maintain their independence and their resilience in their community. So it's crucial that we have an IAA system that acts as that filter to make sure that people are getting the right support to live the life that they want to lead. And again, members will be aware, last year we did a big piece of work around redesign of the IAA service to make sure that it was in a position to perform that function, and it was set up appropriately. Then there's reablement on this systems journey. Reablement is about that sort of step down, what we would call tertiary prevention. So where somebody has had a need to use an acute service, how can we support that person to maintain and regain as much of that independence and resilience when they're in that service offering? And this is where this report comes in today. With all of that prevention infrastructure that we've put in place over the last 2 years, we still need to make sure that for those individuals in that acute part of the system, so who have been supported in their community, who've received targeted prevention, who've been supported and advised at IAA, and who've gone through that reablement journey, we still need to make sure that we've got the right staffing structures, the right model for supporting those in acute support. And that long-term acute support includes our support for people with learning disabilities, for our mental health support, and our older adults care and support packages as well. So that's the sort of area that we're referring to here. And that includes those processes like comprehensive assessment and review, those activities that social workers will do on a day-to-day basis for that cohort in acute support. So it's really important that with all the work and the effort we've put into prevention, we also make sure we've got that final part of the system, that acute support, working effectively, and that our teams and our performance measures are designed in a way to reflect that. So it's a very long intro, but that's why this is such a complex report, because we're trying to do two things here for you. We're trying to provide you with information to assess whether that journey so far, the IAA, the reablement, the EIP, whether that journey so far is giving you early signs that it's on the right track and that the model that we're developing is working. And as part of that then, it's looking for your views, your advice, your steer around the long-term support that we provide off the back of that. So I think we're certainly suggesting in this report that we're confident that the changes we previously made are working. It's now a question of if members are confident and comfortable that that's going in the right direction, then are we on the right track with the redesign of acute services that we're proposing as well. So two slightly different functions, and that's what the report is broadly trying to cover for you today.
Thank you, Dave. We'll go on to questions, and I think the first question we have is from Councillor David Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So a question from me, really. It was a fairly overarching one. It is still early days, you mentioned, obviously, for the Early Intervention Hub from April of this year. So what's the engagement been with teams so far, and what are their views on how this next step is going?
Sorry. So we've undertaken a couple of workshops, a straw man event with our team leads, in which we presented what we thought were the issues and asked them really to design the way forward based on their experience in the teams. They then came up with the broad structure, given different options. They chose the option that's detailed in the report around a large north team, a large south team, and then the other teams around that. So yes, they've been involved. We came up with the initial proposals, initial options and questions. They then were involved with straw man and other workshops to actually come out with the final proposal.
No, that's helpful because obviously you want to be doing things with people, not to them, and yet also keeping in touch with that community's focus that we've emphasised before. So thank you.
Can I clarify that, Chair? Was your question also asking around how are the teams embracing the changes that have been made so far?
Yes, to an extent, but I think you've rightly answered the second part of that, which is the forward part, but how they so far.
In terms of embedding IAA, I suppose, as part of our bigger system, I think that did take a while. I think it was a sort of sudden introduction last year, and I think it did take some time for us all to work through as an adult services department how IAA would work within that new system. But I think now those relationships are much more positive. There's a different dynamic, and it seems to be working much more smoothly. It's taken its time, but we're getting there, and IAA is now fully embedded within our new system, I think, as part of that.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Councillor Horler.
Good morning, everybody. This is on relation to 3.3. A single information advice assistance hub, removing the complexity for residents. Whilst the data is positive, have we sought feedback from the residents on as how the new system is working for them? Thank you.
We've bedded sort of evaluation into the IAA systems. So every month, one of the team members will call a number of people who've had support from IAA during that month to find out how their experience has been, whether their issues were resolved at the time, or whether there was any further need for any further support. So on the whole, that feedback is very positive. People do feel that their outcomes have been met. Where they're identifying difficulties, the odd occasion somebody may have said, oh yes, I understand, and then afterwards come back, and we bring them back, sort of say, well, okay, I didn't really follow through with what your advice was, so we would go back and revisit that with that individual. So yes, we are gathering feedback as we go along and trying to improve on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. And the question I've got is around 3.5 of the report and these statements. Individuals open to long-term care teams are people that are identified at IAA stage that following assessment and reablement by the Integrated Reablement Service require a care and support plan. So it came up during our conversations as to whether or not the demographic data is recorded as to this cohort of people. We felt that might be useful for ongoing evaluation.
Thank you, Councillor Clarkson. It's a really critical question, and yes and no. So we know it's important to monitor that demographic data. What we've struggled to do so far is to, or in the past I should say, is to track the trend lines in that demographic data against the trend lines for the numbers of people that we predict will enter into care and support. So we know how many people are receiving care and support, and we know the ages of those people, and the team do that assessment of that data quite regularly. But we need to go further than that. We need to go to the point where to assess our performance, we're saying how many new people over the next few years do we think will require care and support, and how does that compare to the demographic trends in terms of an ageing population. This year, we're doing a piece of work with finance colleagues to try and do some of that tracking, and that's really important because that forms a fundamental part of how we then will look to set budgets and how we'll look to set the targets for how the system operates. So we track that data at the minute in terms of our current cohort, and we will be looking at it in future in a more predictive way about those who we think will require care and support.
Thank you very much for that answer. Yeah, it's the change in demographic that we were sort of mindful of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question is from me. In relation to the pathway in Appendix 2, what measures are in place to ensure residents receive a consistent approach in being directed to the most appropriate support following initial help or referral? And how is this process monitored to ensure individuals are not overlooked or directed to unsuitable services? However, you touched on this with the monthly feedback thing just a moment ago, so I'll leave the rest.
Yes. Obviously, because we've got IAA, we've got a small management team within IAA. We have, there are 12 staff, and then we've got managers. It is a very busy team. They have daily briefings where they just catch up with the staff every morning just to sort of try and keep that flow going. There's a duty system which is overseen by a manager. So the work is all overseen by a very small management team to try and maintain that sort of consistency of approach, that proactive work. So all the work is overseen. The staff themselves have immense knowledge and skills. They're staff that have been within adult services for a number of years, and they're working really well together to try and give that different approach at the front door to try and help people resolve their own issues wherever possible. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
I will come in there because it's so hard when you're in a role to sing your own praises, but the amount of management information that the group managers will go through on a daily basis to assess how that's working, and the amount of quality assurance work that goes on is absolutely vast. It needs to be vast. It's important that it is. But those quality assurance conversations, and the group managers will know well, I'm quite often saying, can you explain to me why this proportion of people have progressed into comprehensive assessment? I will always get an answer straight back to say, yeah, recently we've sampled the data, I've been through the cases, this is what IAA have referred to. On these cases it was correct. On this one we've given a bit of advice and support to the team who are doing it. So just to provide that additional reassurance to members, I know group managers are doing that quality assurance process on a daily basis to go through and sense check to make sure that no one's been missed through that system.
That's great, thank you both. On to Councillor David Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I think I've got the next two, so I'll try to go from both. Yeah. Okay, this is at 3.7 in the report. The first bit is fairly straightforward, I think. You've grouped information on caseloads in the appendices, but I think I know the answer, but I'm asking the question to be sure. Do we monitor the average caseloads per worker, and is there any kind of guidance as to what's an appropriate number of cases? Because I know that's something that we've looked at previously for children's services.
Within the QA work that Dave mentioned, we do monitor caseloads for social workers. They're standing at the moment between 32 to 35 cases per full-time equivalent worker. That is quite high, but at the moment, because we've got the elements of QA in place, the one-to-one supervision, the team leads are also available for the information and for advice, and they are monitoring constantly the pressures within the teams. So yeah, 32 to 35 is quite high, especially when you compare it to children's services, where I think at the moment it's around 20. Yeah, but there's no actual framework for adult services in the same way as children. But if you compare across, then children's would be 20. So it is quite high, but we are confident that we are managing that within the teams, and there are supports there for social workers so that they don't feel overwhelmed at any time, really.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then moving on, again, hopefully it's a fairly simple answer. You referred to multi-professional transition planning within complex case management at 3.7. Could you give some indication of I just wanted to check, is this also people transitioning from children to adults, but perhaps from adults to older adults?
Yes.
And then what's that kind of level of input, which I suppose relates to the earlier question, for those complex case management, i.e., what sort of amount of, are people reviewed monthly, quarterly? It's just getting a feel for how the caseload is broken down.
In terms of young people going through transition, we have one dedicated transition lead person there's multi-agency transition panels that are held every month so that adult services, children's services bring cases where they feel adult services intervention is going to be needed through into adulthood. Those young people then are linked to an adult services worker who will then attend, often they'll just attend the school reviews transition starts at 14, but obviously in those early years it's sort of fairly hands-off. So they'll be attending the school reviews. Depending on the complexity of the young person, as that young person moves towards 18, the involvement from the adult services practitioner will increase to try and ensure that there's a smooth transition at 18. However, one of the things that we've identified is that that's actually really hard to target. When you've got a caseload of 30 to 35, it's quite difficult to prioritise those cases. It is one of the areas where we feel that the amount of support that we're able to provide at the moment isn't as effective as we would like it to be to ensure smooth transitions.
Thank you. That's a very helpful and candid answer.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Councillor Steve Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine's in regard paragraph 4.1. The data and evidence how deprivation impacts on the social determinants of health. And while people in Torfaen are living longer, many enter ill health earlier than most affluent boroughs. And the question I got is, deprivation is a wide term encompassing a number of factors affecting health. Have we drilled deep into localised data to determine what factors are most affecting our residents, which in turn will better inform the redesign of our services?
Thanks, Councillor Evans. It's a great question, and this goes to the essence of all of the work that we've been doing for the last few years on county plan, Marmot master planning, and our community's approach. And importantly, the link between all of that work at the community end and the prevention end, between that work and our work in the acute part of the world. So it's a critical question for us. The answer is yes. So we do have, from conversations with yourselves, from conversations with the community groups in your area, and from the data that flows through into our prevention hub, we're starting to build up now quite a rich picture of what the specific determinants of health, which specific determinants of health are having the biggest impact in which communities across the borough. That then allows us to target our prevention work more effectively, and it allows us to have an open and honest conversation with those communities to put that data on the table and say, how can we work with you as a community to address this challenge that exists within your space? So in that prevention area, absolutely. It's probably too soon yet for us to start to use that prevention data to influence how we deliver our long-term care and support at place. And the reason I say that's too soon is that Prevention Hub has only been up and running for, well, less than 6 months, just over a quarter now. And so the data flowing through isn't yet at the point where we've got 6 months, 12 months of data to say, actually, these are the issues that could have been prevented that are now resulting in someone appearing at one of our IAA front doors. So we need a little bit more data to be able to use that to shape the design of acute services, but that's certainly part of the pathway. What I will say is that shouldn't hold back or influence the sort of models that we're talking about today, because those models will create the right infrastructure across the county for us to be able to deliver that, so we can then target the resource effectively within the different patches that we've got at a later date. We don't need to sort that as part of that broader redesign. This shouldn't hold that work back.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Excellent. Next one comes from Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. This is around 4.4 of the report, and the statement, while Q1 results are very positive, our goal is a 60% IAA only response rate. Therefore, ongoing monitoring of the contact data continues. I know this came up in previous scrutiny, so the question is, the AA team responded to 47% in that quarter, the goal being 60%. So the question is that set too high, or how has that figure been chosen? Is it a realistic goal to hit within the early years of these service adjustments, or should we adjust the target to be slightly more realistic to what's actually achievable at this time? If we believe it's achievable, what levers can be pulled and what more can be done towards reaching that 60%? So it's quite a big question.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll come in here. Do bring me back to it if I miss any points on this one as I go through. You're right, it is an ambitious target in terms of 60%. The reason that that target has been set at that level is based on the academic research that's been tested in a lot of different areas that shows the sort of call volumes that we should be able to support out in the community and out through prevention once the model is in, embedded and working effectively. There's been a lot of confusion around some of that data, and that confusion, I think, has impacted on this as well, because what we do and what we've done for these figures so far is exclude some calls that come in from our data. So things like blue badge enquiries, for example, aren't included within that 47%. Things like referrals to universal services aren't included, or some of those universal services aren't included within that 47%. So since publishing this report, what we've done is gone back to the IPC, to the university that produced that initial guidance, and said, something feels off here. We know our teams are working really efficiently and effectively, but we're nowhere near that target. What's going on? They've advised us that we should be including the blue badge data and the universal services data within that headline capture figure. What that does is puts our numbers, I think, closer to 70+% when you include that data in there. So well over the 60% target. So I don't think the target is wrong, and I think it's really important that we have ambitious targets because, and I will really reiterate this point probably on several times today, genuinely believe that people have the best outcomes when we can support them in their community independently. So that IAA function of actually being able to support people to go back into their community rather than drawing people into a care and support plan is really, really critical. And I make no apologies for setting ambitious targets in that space because it matters so much. Once we update the data for the future quarters, I think hopefully you'll see that that target is achievable going forward.
Thank you. You have a question, Councillor Clarkson?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for that explanation, that it is a data inclusion issue rather than an actual service issue is very reassuring, and hopefully as you say, the future data will show that and reflect that. Thank you very much for that answer.
And your next question, Councillor?
Yeah, apologies for the brief pause. Again, question 1 data covers springtime. So do we have any projections for numbers through the winter period, 25-26, and how we will work through this with the current system of longer-term care prior to the redesign or as we transition through to the new way of working? There tends to be a more crisis-driven interventions come forward during the winter periods. So how will flex be built into the system to manage this?
Pretty much in the same way that we always do. What we do know in adult services is that our data does not reflect the pressure hits during the winter. We do get a lot more noise in the system from other partners, and as they experience more pressures on certain parts of the whole system. But what we do recognise is that where possible, we do put in more like care management. We've got a grant that is, well, it's not a grant, it's actually recurring funding, which is exciting, that has come through from Welsh Government, which talks about the pathways of care delays. And as part of that, we've allocated some money for increased care management assessment. So that will mitigate, because usually we get winter resilience money and things like that to be able to increase care management. We know that that's unlikely to happen because we've received this money. So we have got some money set aside for increased care management for when impacts hit other parts of our system, but we do know through our data that actually the demand at the front door remains pretty consistent throughout the year.
Thank you for the response. Yeah, that answers the question.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Councillor Steve Evans.
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding paragraph 4.6. States that we still share the redesign with the ISPB and the MH and LH and the SP. But how will we collaborate with the Health Board and the third sector in the initial stages of redesigning the services?
Thank you, Councillor. No, again, a brilliant question. I think it's fair to say our ISPB has become one of the more robust mechanisms for partnership working. We work very, very closely with health colleagues, with the Torvine Voluntary Alliance, but also with the police and wider parts of the health system in those sessions. And what we do is we pull together a list of those outcomes that we want to monitor together, and we monitor those on a quarterly basis. What that allows us to do is it allows us to sit down together in a room and start to say, okay, what's not working within this system? What do we need to change? As part of that, some of the common feedback that we've had are areas like transition from children into adult social care, mental health support, and the mechanisms that we put in place in the way that we provide that support, and learning disabilities. So that's the sort of feedback that we've had. So I think it's fair to say that partners around that ISPB table have already influenced the case for change that we've presented you as members with today. The next step for us now is for the team to go away, because it is a council team, so for us to go away and say, okay, we've heard you, we understand why you think it's important we make those changes, here is our proposal for what those changes should be. The ISPB will then scrutinise those proposals and essentially tell us, does it feel confident that the changes we're putting forward will address the needs that they've already identified? So they have been involved in that journey so far, and the next step will be for them to see the proposed redesign.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that.
Thank you. Next question, Councillor David Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I think some parts of this have been answered quite well, but we noted the issue of the team's resilience. So I was just checking, has there been more sort of staff absence than before? Are you seeing sort of stresses that have actually led to that perhaps slight fall in resilience? That's the first part. The second part, I think you've actually answered. I was going to ask about the evidence data that was accruing for giving you the information about transition team, but I think you've answered that. I would say that I think that actually is a very positive thing to support. Sorry, just don't need to give an opinion, but I think you've set the case for that very well. So just about the staffing, really. Sorry.
Okay. In terms of staff resilience, what we are seeing within the system is we are seeing much more complex situations being brought to the attention of the long-term teams. Complexity in terms of physical health problems, mental health problems, housing situations, amongst other things. So what we are doing within the teams is providing a daily fishbowl meeting where everybody gets the chance and opportunity to discuss any cases where there are concerns and any barriers to progressing forward. And the support of the whole team is there then in terms of more heads, better than one really, in terms of problem solving. We are monitoring long-term sick and we are monitoring short-term sick, and we are following the policies around that. Currently we've got 4 social workers off on long-term sick across the teams. Short-term sickness I hadn't checked, sorry, before I came to the meeting, but we are confident that we are managing the short-term sickness and the long-term sickness with the support of our HR colleagues in the best possible way, really. But it is in terms of complexity that is the issue, and processes from other parts of the system that we need to dovetail into to be able to get the outcomes we need for the people that we work with, particularly around things like continuing healthcare, housing referral, that sort of thing.
Just to add to that as well, and to hopefully reassure members, we know how difficult the social worker role is, particularly with the complexity of cases that social workers are dealing with, as Joe's explained. But we haven't seen a particular spike in terms of sickness absence as a result of some of the changes that we're making. We saw some initial spikes when the redesign process was going through. That's not uncommon when we go through a process of redesign, because changes leads to uncertainty. Uncertainty is a contributing factor when people are looking at their overall health and well-being. But that has followed the usual trajectory downwards after the redesign has been embedded, and we've not seen a sustained growth now in sickness absence across those teams. What Joe's described, though, is how we manage that effectively. So because we know there's pressure on those teams, the onus is on us as management and as leaders to actually put in place measures to protect people's well-being before it becomes a sickness absence. And I think that's what Joe and the other group managers have done effectively.
Well, thank you for that, and I think you answered the other part, which was implicit, which is around, was there a spike in terms of...
Thank you. Next question, Councillor Nick Horler.
Thank you, Chair. Is communities between community agencies sufficiently joined up and working effectively, and how do we monitor the quality of community provision? I do have a supplementary after this one.
There is more work to do in terms of joining up community activity. What I will say is that our role, we've got to be really careful here as a local authority. Our role is making sure that we're providing the resources and the tools for communities and the data for communities to be able to come together and identify and address the challenges that exist within those communities. Where I think councils have perhaps gone wrong in the past is trying to control what happens at that community level. It's not for us to do that level of control and coordination, and that always leads to the community sector being pulled further and further into service provision at a level that's inappropriate. So that's certainly not what our community's model is based on. What it does mean is that we need to still make sure that there are mechanisms for community groups to talk about that data. So it's no good as just saying, well, we've got lots of rich data around a community. We need to make sure that that is shared with those community groups so they can do what they do best, which is essentially designing up how they're going to help and self-serve in the community. We've got that data coming through now, but I'm not yet in a position where I'm confident that the flow of that data back out into the community groups is working as effectively as it could. So that's the area where I think we've got more work to do, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Chair, can I ask my supplementary on this one?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, state transition to support people with neurodivergency. What extra resources are we using to help those people with neurodivergency?
Sorry, Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
If I can pick up the sort of support from a prevention and early intervention approach, and then colleagues will talk through the thinking that's led to that being a factor in the redesign proposals going forward. From a prevention perspective, it's important that we apply the same approach to neurodiversity that we'd apply to any of the other areas of health and wellbeing that we look to support. So we should be supporting and encouraging the right activity in communities as the starting point, as primary prevention. And that doesn't have to be specific programmes. That can be things as simple as having quiet hours in shops, in local shops, for people who have autism to be able to go and engage in those shops. That's the type of community activity that can be done very simply. So we've got a job to do to support the community sector to understand what interventions they can make at a really simple level. We've then got the second part of that system, which is the targeted prevention part through the EIP hub. And they are very, very closely at the minute, in that first quarter, monitoring the data that's coming in on all of those wider determinants of health to see where we should best be commissioning services, preventative services. That data isn't showing any patterns yet to suggest what type of intervention we could best put in place from a targeted perspective to support people with neurodiversity. So there's more data, I think, that we need to see coming through before we can commission the right support services in that space. It's important that we wait for that, because what we don't want to do is go and commission services in a preventative space that actually don't help us to support those individuals with that journey towards resilience. We certainly don't want to be in a position where we're creating, say, a support worker infrastructure where that infrastructure isn't needed or wanted. And that's the sort of feedback that we get quite regularly. Going going to hand over to colleagues, though, for the final part of that, because I think what you've identified there, Councillor Hall, really effectively is that not only do we need the preventative infrastructure, we also need the supportive infrastructure for those who have neurodiversity and are in the acute part of our system, and that's definitely been something that colleagues have considered in the redesign so far.
Great, thank you.
Yes, definitely as part of this redesign, we wanted to look at areas where we felt we could do things better and do things differently. All our work is person-centred, and I think that is sort of crucial, whoever you are working with. But I think what became apparent is that some individuals, some of those individuals are neurodivergent, need a different type of approach. They need a worker that can build a really good relationship with them and sort of help them to become as independent as they can be, but that's more intervention rather than care and support. And at the moment, adult services focus tends to be much more around that care and support rather than that intervention into independence. So that's why part of our redesign is about how we feel we could do things differently to improve the support that we can offer to those people who do need, for a period of time, that more acute, more intensive support, but always with the goal of supporting them to become independent again. Does that make sense?
Great, thank you ever so much. That's really reassuring to hear from a person that has neurodivergency within his background. So that's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next question comes from Councillor Linda Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. It's again continuing along the line of sustainable and resilient communities. The question is there the sufficient capacity within the community to provide the support, along with increasing demand that's being directed in all services directions? Is that capacity also sustainable and resilient? And do we have any thoughts on contingency should a community provision no longer be able to provide support or be withdrawn at short notice, especially on the support side where there may be a volunteer aspect or a lower level sort of support network being provided, but which is crucial to the individual as part of their journey?
Well, members will know I could talk for hours on this topic, so please do keep me in check, because you know this is a particular passion of mine. When we brought out our community wellbeing strategy and we brought that before council, we were really clear that there were several areas that the council needed to take action to support communities and to support the development of community groups. And some of that was about strengthening our volunteer base. And when I say volunteer, I mean going beyond volunteers who are part of a formal group and looking more broadly at active citizens. And that's a really important point, because a lot of the community infrastructure that I talk about is actually things that communities do naturally on a day-to-day basis. So the example I give about a shop being able to put on quiet hours, a neighbour checking in on someone, a camera club that identifies that Mrs Jones hasn't been along for a while and somebody gives them a call. That is community support to improve the health and well-being of that community. And that happens organically, and that happens at a level where we as a council don't need to intervene. What we need to do is support those communities that maybe don't have that activity happening to the same scale as some other places, to make sure that we're helping grow that volunteer base, grow the concept of active citizenship and support new community groups. So moving on to that element where we're directly intervening then to try and help the growth of that, I think there is a next phase, and this was always identified in the community wellbeing strategy as part of the work we'd be doing this year and next, to look at how we direct resource into those community groups. And if you speak to colleagues in TVA, in the social care space, they'll talk about the Section 16 requirements, which is all around how do we start to commission the community sector more effectively for that intervention-based service provision, rather than saying, well, we'll deliver it ourselves as a council. That commissioning is really important for the community, for the more structured parts of the voluntary and community sector, because it gives certainty over funding. So that commissioning is about delivering outcomes for a budget that comes from the council, the health board, somebody who holds that as a core budget, and it takes away some of the uncertainty of grant provision that exists elsewhere. We're not there yet, and I wouldn't expect us to be there yet in terms of having a commissioning programme for community commissioning. We're still in the realms at the minute of grants with outcomes attached to them. What we have been doing, though, is ramping up the level of financial support that we're putting into communities, and that's been supported through Shared Prosperity Fund. It's also been supported through the new fund that members are looking to access now around support for community groups that are delivering against their health and wellbeing agenda as well. So there's more resource going out into the community sector, and there's more of a focus from partners, TVA being the most prominent one. There's more of a focus for partners in that space around how do we get volunteers aligned to the health and wellbeing need. So instead of having 10 different community groups who are focusing on one issue, how do we inform the sector that actually, if you come together and share some of your leadership set, share some of your grant raising opportunities, share some of your volunteer coordination opportunities, if you can come together to do that, that can make you more resilient as a whole series of community groups that can still allow you to maintain that uniqueness and that identity. And that's some work that TVA have been supporting us with as well. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. We do need to go further. We do need to move towards a community commissioning model. Just on the final part of your question then about the contingency planning, ultimately what will happen if we don't get the community part of the prevention system working effectively? Firstly, we'll see more demand on prevention services. So not on the acute, not on the IAA, not on the acute services that we've got. We'll see more demand flowing into prevention services. At the minute, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing an increase in demand, which says to me that the interventions we're making in the community are working. As a contingency position, we would then look to bolster that preventative part of the system. So if for some reason that communities element wasn't working, and as I say, at the minute it is, and I've got every reason to believe it will continue to do so, it's the prevention part of the system that we would look to strengthen first. It's almost having layers before you get to that IAA acute service front door, so that there's other fail-safes to make sure that we're supporting people at the right place at the right time as well. We keep the entire system under review. So we're always monitoring the numbers, probably to a fault, and I know colleagues here will smile because they know how much I love my data and how much I love to know how many people are being supported in each part of the system, but it matters for that reason, because it matters so that we can understand the flow and we can understand which parts of the system are performing effectively. And at the minute, whilst we're not fully there yet, I'm confident that that community element of the system is holding up, is resilient, and is doing what we would need and want it to do.
Thanks. That's a really useful update, and it is something that we always need to be aware of, is that just before the front door intervention, and if that's working well, it will again put off that time where people actually approach slightly, maybe even more so. So really useful update. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor David Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And you prompted me to say that perhaps I should declare an interest as a board member of TVA. But let's note that. I think you've partly answered this, I think, Joe, but when you had the sentence about teams being coterminous with community council boundaries, I had a slight vision of sort of 6 or 7 different teams. I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So perhaps you could just outline how many teams and why you use that terminology. So, for example, is there an intent to work more closely with community councils? Just a little bit of that.
Thanks for that question, Dave. So what we've looked at in terms of the structure is a north team, a south team, an adult mental health team, a learning disability, possibly with day ops, but we're not quite there yet in terms of our thinking, plus a new team which looks at transition and neurodiversity, although we don't have a name for that team yet. So that's the sort of structure we're looking at. It's not being confirmed yet because we're in the early days, but that's the sort of trajectory that we're going on. And in terms of coterminous with the community council boundaries, that is about working more closely in place-based care and more closely with the community councils through the ISPB and other boards that way. So the North team then would take in obviously the Aberystwyth, the Blaenavon community councils, South team then the Hentless councils and the other councils in the south. Yeah. So.
I was just thank you for that clarification. I thought it was probably...
Okay, if I can just come in briefly, and again, this is me probably overemphasising the data here, as you know I have a tendency to do. But one of the key factors for us is being able to align all of the data that we collect to a community council footprint where we need to. So postcodes are going to be critical here. And what that allows us to do is track data from health on the same footprints as we track data from the council. So that when we look at that whole system, we're able to say within this ward or within this area, within this community council boundary, here is what the situation for the health and wellbeing system looks like. What we've had in the past is GP's data that we can't reconcile with social care data because the GP footprint is very different from the social care footprint that we're working on. So the structures and the community council boundaries are also aligned to that postcode level data too.
Thank you for that. Councillor Horler?
Thank you, Chair. This is still on 4.9. To utilise existing resources to realise the redesign. By existing resources, do we mean staffing, financial, or both?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Horler. We mean all of it, really, in terms of the resources we've got available. That we know that there are no new resources, and we know that we need to work within the staffing resource envelope, the financial resource envelope that we've currently got, because there is no new resource on the table for us. So we are trying to look at which is the best way to do that, where we're best placed to put people where the needs are, really.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Evans?
Yeah, before I think I'll have to declare an interest. I'm the chair of Thornhill Community Centre, which other members probably know. My question is regarding paragraph 4.10. To ensure efficient and effective teams which are future-proofed and can flex to meet the needs of the citizens for Torvine now and in the future. And my question is, without increasing staffing, how can our teams be more resilient to cover absences and vacancies? And also, how can we ensure the quality of the service is sustained?
Thanks, Councillor. It's a great question and one that we always grapple with. Ultimately, the size of the teams that we have depends on the number of people that we're supporting. And the infrastructure that we've put in place over the last few years will see more people supported in their community and through prevention activities for a greater proportion of their life. And that's why tracking that demographic data is so important. If we've got people who are suffering from health conditions, that means that they're becoming a user of acute social care with a care and support plan in their 50s, then that's going to drive more people into that deeper acute part of the system, and that's going to create more pressure on the teams that we've got. Members will be aware that budgets are and will always remain incredibly tight in this space, so it's not an area where we can easily grow the level of staff resource. So what we need to focus on instead is how do we predict and how do we support a reduction of the number of people going into the acute part of the system through the wider interventions that we're doing. That's the essence of why we've been on a 2-year programme to redesign the entire system. We believe in that principle of supporting people out in their community. One of the things we will always continue to track, and you've heard it already today, is things like caseloads. We'll always continue to track staff sickness and wellbeing, and we'll always continue to take a balanced approach to how we manage that. But it's really important that there's never a choice here that says add more resource into this system without that resource being taken from somewhere else. So it's really important for us as a team that we manage within those budgets and those resources that you as members have set in terms of where those priorities lie, and that's what we're seeking to do. So there will always be pressures, there will always be demand. That's why we're focusing on the prevention part of the system. And so far, I think it's fair to say that it's achieving what we expected it to achieve at this stage, but we do need to make sure that it goes further than it's done so far.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, you know, we need to do this. It's do or die, really. I mean, you look at the statistics and healthy life expectancy, we're on a downward decline. We have been since 2019. The average for Torvine for a man is 54.9 years old. Females 53.3. Wales average is 60.3 for a man, 59.6. You know, a couple of years ago that was about 2 or 3 years higher. And we're on a really worrying trend. And as Dave has rightly referenced, we don't want to be seeing 50-year-olds coming through a higher level of care need, which is why we need to shift that demand, shift that approach to the front door and early intervention prevention, because you know, that if we don't do that, we're going to be drowning in acute cases. And I think there is an important point to be made about caseload. There is a big difference between a caseload of 30 people at an IAA stage and at a more acute stage. You know, that at the more acute stage is when I would worry. So I'm more concerned about that distribution of you know, IAA to acute stage ratio for those caseloads. But yeah, I mean, we absolutely need to do this because you know, every trend that we're seeing points to social care collapsing at some point in the future, and this is you know, not rhetoric to say that. So yeah.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Evans?
Yeah, the only part I sort of can't guess how we're going to cover, but you know, limited staff. If we, you know, there are absences of vacancies, you know, there has to be something in place, the sort of like a contingency, surely, you know.
So practically, what the reorganisation means is that when we moved from the patch bases into IAA and IR, we moved social workers and other resources, support workers, to the front door. That left the teams behind them being smaller than they were before. So what this reorganisation will do, instead of having 5 small teams, we'll make it into 2 bigger teams, and then critical mass means that we can cover the sickness absence and the vacancies a little bit better. We do have some vacancies in social work, although they are small at the moment, and we're lucky there in terms of, you know, social workers choosing to work in Torvine, and that's always been a strong point for us. Where our vacancies are at the moment is in enablement support workers in the IR part of the system. But what we think we can do, and what we're sure actually that we can do by reorganising the teams in the way that we want to reorganise them, is to create a better buffer between sickness absence and vacancies by having the mass in the teams to be able to cover the referrals, so that we can prioritise the referrals in the team a little bit better. Does that help?
Excellent. Yeah, no, thanks for that. That's more comprehensive, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Clarkson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this next question is around 4.11 of the report, and it was about, really, we wanted more information to sort of expand on the explanation that you've given. It talks about the redesign of the will enable adult service to mitigate the impact of the withdrawal of the Regional Integrated Fund. Some time off yet in March 2027, but obviously crucial to plan and forward for. So this seems like quite a large chunk, and it was focused towards the North Torvine Wellbeing team. So the question really is, how is that going to be mitigated? What actions are going to be put in place to deal with the loss of that funding and the pressures that may create on the team? Loss of funding is always an issue. And it talks about an exit strategy as well. So in what way will the redesign provide that exit strategy?
Okay, so when we moved into the 5 patches, we followed a Vanguard model, and the RIF was it to enable us to put that Vanguard model in place. That model now is embedded across all the teams, and therefore doesn't any longer meet the criteria for the RIF funding, and that's why the RIF funding will go. We do need to look at how we structure teams going forward and where that funding is going to come from. One of the grants that Eunice talked about earlier in the package of care delays is recurring money, so we've put a bid in there for some extra support, financial support to cover some of those stresses and strains then from the RIF funding. And then as we develop, as we move into this new structure, we will look, as we do every time a vacancy becomes available, as to whether that vacancy is needed, where that vacancy is needed, and what type of role we need. So every time a vacancy becomes available, we always look to the best possible way to move forward in that space. And again, it's looking at other forms of funding that might be available in other RIF bids that we could make, or the funding bids that we could make going forward. We've got a little bit of time to play with, but it's having that in the back of our minds that we need to get there.
Thanks. Just one thing very quickly to add to Joe's answer, which was really, really comprehensive. It's important that we eventually get the structure to the point where that core structure is within the scale of resources that the council is putting forward through core. What we don't want to do is put the system at risk because we're reliant on grant funding. I think the approach that we're taking is really sensible, where there is other grant funding, to use that to manage a transition. And as Joe's explained, there will be naturally vacancies, changes in some of the technology that we use, and importantly, the work that I've talked around demand, that will give us the ability to do that and to be able to release those vacancies at later dates. So that grant funding, just to reassure members that we're talking about there, isn't to replicate the challenges that we've had with RIF of having a system that's reliant on it. It's to ease the transition to the point where we get to a stable core funded structure through the wider changes that we've been describing.
Yeah, if I just come back briefly, the larger team structure, is that also going to be able to absorb more of the capacity that's sort of currently we're heading towards losing on the funding side? Same as it would with sickness and absence.
We hope so, yes. We hope that, like I said, with the critical mass of people, that we can absorb more pressure than having social workers dispersed over a wider area in teams.
Okay, work in progress. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Thank you. I think I won't ask question 18 because it's been covered, I think, quite well. But I would move on to 413, which was young people in transition to adulthood. It was just checking that you know, your confidence in the sort of numbers coming through and that you've been able to predict that. And I suppose it's, for me, it highlighted that the proposal to have a transition team seems to be made. So it's more of an observation than a question per se. But if you want to make a comment, then please feel free.
Yeah, in terms of the numbers, as I said earlier, we do track young people who potentially need multi-agency transition from the age of 14, so we can be fairly confident that those numbers are correct. What we don't know is the numbers of people who are perhaps undergoing a life transition rather than the strict transition from 17 to 18. And those are the people that we don't want to lose sight of. We want it to be a transition team in the wider sense of the word. Transition can happen for people at different life stages, and those people are more likely to come through our IAA route. And then from that IAA route, if we identify that they would benefit from that more intervention approach, then they would also be referred to the team. So that's more of the unknown, but will evolve over time because it will start from zero, I suppose, and then pick up.
Yes, it does. I think that's very helpful, and it's really kind of reflective where I was thinking that as you get better at sort of picking up the need within the community, you may find slightly hidden elements whereby perhaps families have done all the support, but they're no longer able to continue, and you get people emerging. So, but yeah, my point remains, I think it's a good argument for the transition team.
Thank you. I'll move on to question 21 because you've answered the one for me just now, so I won't ask. What did we learn from the redesign and implementation of the IAA that we would do differently in this redesign process of the longer care teams? What challenges do you anticipate encountering during the redesign process? Have we learned from other authorities who had redesigned their long-term care teams?
If I just introduce that, I'm going to ask colleagues here to come in and talk me through the lessons that have been learned through this process, because obviously colleagues have been much closer to that than me. Just to pick up very briefly on that point around learning from elsewhere, this is one of the big advantages of us working in a federated model with Blaen y Gwent, because there are strengths in Blaen y Gwent around transitions, there are strengths in Blaen y Gwent emerging around supported employment, that we are reflecting on, and that I know the team have already started to consider in the way that we design the system going forward for acute support. The other local authority we've been speaking to around this is Powys, and increasingly Powys are sense-checking some of the work that we're doing in spaces beyond adult social care as well, but more broadly around some of that health and wellbeing. So just to reassure members, we're certainly in contact with others to both set benchmarks and to learn good practice from elsewhere. But in terms of reflections on the journey of redesign, I'll hand over to colleagues.
One of the critical things that we have learned from the IAA and IR is around staff engagement and consultation. In terms of, we have engaged with our team leads in terms of the straw man, to get them on board and to share their ideas in terms of what the longer term care teams need to look at. And that for us was critical, and also timings in terms of like the staff consultation for the IAA and IR was over Christmas, which wasn't, or very close to Christmas, which wasn't ideal. So we're building a project timeline now that makes sure any of the staff consultation or sharing of big changes happens either well in advance of Christmas or after Christmas, so people don't have to experience the worry over that period of time. Also, that is absolutely critical that we have project management to keep us on track, to keep all of the documents, and we've managed to secure that. So that's our next step in the process, is developing a very strict project timeline. Also, just having time and space to develop. One thing we did learn from the IAA and IR is that first 12 months of implementation from a new team was absolutely critical in terms of being able to understand what we are doing, what we need to change, what we need to tweak, and to be able to deliver an efficient and effective service. And we're still going through that now, and that very much will be hopefully the approach from our new team in particular, but also from the longer term team, so that we have that time to understand the demands.
Thank you for that. Next question comes from Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. This was, again, it's more of a suggestion rather than a question. It's at 6.1. You mentioned, of course, you referred earlier, the redesign has been completed without requirement for any additional resources, no financial implications, but perhaps is there consideration for sort of like one-off additional staff training, maybe an increased staff budget, a one-off injection, if you like, that helps get the staff into the positions that you want them to do? It's just a consideration. I don't know if you've considered it, but I think it's probably picking up on the lessons learned, exactly as my colleague asked there, really.
It's absolutely something for us to consider, and I know it's something, to be fair, that colleagues have highlighted to me as a need, and some learning from the previous redesigns as well. So it's certainly something we'll consider. It's important with training that we are clear on what the principles of the redesign are all about, and that we embed those principles into the training first. What we need to avoid is saying to people, you were working in a system, we're now going to put you in this system, and we're not going to explain why that matters and why that journey matters. Now, part of that will be day-to-day management by the group managers of that process of change, but I do think there's probably some merit in us building that into part of a training and transition process as well. So certainly something we'll consider, yeah.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Evans.
Yeah, some of this has been answered, but I'll read out anyway. Adult Services will create a project plan with timelines and milestones and the implementation date of April 2026. When are you looking to have the initial design structure to commence consultations, I think which you've stated already, and will there be a transition period once the redesign has been agreed?
Tomorrow is what the question is. That's going to be my first time that we're going to put together a really detailed project plan, building back from the 1st of April in terms of we know how long we have to consult for, we know where we're at in terms of what the team leads have come up with, suggested structure. So, and I think we're sharing it as a management team in terms of group managers and our head of service. I'm not sure if Dave's there or not, but we're doing on Monday. So we will have those milestones built in, and then need to be able to allocate the time and the spaces in our calendars to be able to move it forward. But we have got essential project management support, and I cannot sing the praises of the value of that, which is they keep us on track and they sort out all the stuff behind the scenes so we can lead and push forward the change. So tomorrow is my honest answer.
Thank you, and that's pretty good.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. And again, it's more of an observation than anything else. In your appendix 2, the pathways into adults and communities, a bit complicated and fussy. So can I just plead for something clear and simple that will help to explain this as you roll it out? I'm sure you'll take that on board.
I certainly do. It pains myself and Eunice to do that, because I think we'd attempted to simplify this, and clearly, and I think we reflected on this ourselves, haven't managed to do so. It's a complicated pathway. I think we may need to probably put a bit of resource into how we visualise that for members and for the public better. The pathway has to be that complicated. How we show that is certainly some learning for us, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the next is about Appendix 3, really, and it's given us some pretty bare data with some pretty brief headings. So we were wondering whether anyone could sort of talk us through or give us some indication of what the data is telling us and how it will be used to inform the redesign and implementation of the service that's fit for purpose is the bottom line, really.
This, thank you for the question. I love a question when it involves a spreadsheet. Basically, the first, what happens in terms of contacts, obviously they all come into IAA, and what we were trying to do with this is to determine where they've come from and what happens to those individual pathways. So in total, we had 558 initial assessments. 294 of those came from the community, 91 from the hospital discharge, and 173 were in relation to OTs. Now, the OT goes directly to them, and they triage it and sort out any actions from that. So what we focus on in terms of the IAA data is from row 8 downwards, is that, so if you exclude the OT, we had 294 contacts that came into the IAA that were from the community and 91 from the hospital discharge. Those, we then split it into what happened between in the community contacts and the hospital contacts. So the community, we had 294 in total. Of those that came into IAA from the community, 168 went out with no further action after contact assessment, so that was where IAA were doing their job. 53 went directly without any IR referral into a comprehensive assessment, so they went out to what is the long-term care teams, and 73 were referred into our integrated reablement service, so that's where a programme of reablement happens. Of those 294, 53, so the needs could be met by a care and support plan. 224 ended up that their needs could be met by any other means, and 17 there was no eligible needs to be met. Now these outcomes are all driven by our Welsh Government performance data, so they do sound a bit sort of straightforward. But obviously the complexity of the work and everything else that went in behind the IAA stuff is a bit more complex than just those outcomes. And then those that were passed to the integrated reablement team, because it's another set of Welsh Government data that we have to talk about in terms of what the impact of reablement was that 42% of those that went into reablement, their needs could only be met by a care and support plan. So that doesn't mean that reablement was ineffective or anything. It just means that those people might have come in needing intensive reablement because they'd had a stroke or something catastrophic, hospital discharge, although it's in the community, isn't it? So it probably isn't. But something had happened. They might have had a fall or something like that. And but they needed less of a care and support plan by going into reablement. 38, which is 52%, their needs could be met by other means, so that could be through universal services or something like that, community meals, lifeline, that sort of thing, assistive tech, and then 4 of them left with no eligible needs to be met, so that meant that they were fully independent. And then the rest of it is just more management information around how those initial assessments were completed. I suppose they're exactly the same outcomes and talking through hospital discharges, except the weighting towards, care and support plans maybe slightly more. What this will inform is the number that are going through, if you like, our critical bit into care and support plans, because they potentially are the people that will continue to need long-term care and support. So that is our critical bit, is we would expect through everything that happens, prior to our front door and everything, for the number that are coming in and going to, I suppose, long-term care teams should reduce. That should then mean that when they do hit the long-term care teams, a higher proportion of them should be requiring a care and support plan, because they should have been prevented from getting that far if it was before.
So good baseline information for ongoing evaluation as well.
Yes, very good.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, thank you. It's the last question, and I think it's probably partly answered, because I was wondering where Appendix 4 came from. Regional Autism Plan. Wasn't quite sure what its relevance was for this report, but I can see that potentially, I suppose you're illustrating some of the things that you need to report on,
yes.
And that's helpful. And I think it obviously will give the benefit, give the data to ensure that you reinforce some of that redesign. I've made that assumption, but in all honesty, I'm not sure it added an awful lot to the overall report. Just a little observation. Thank you. I think that's the last question, Chair.
Well, I just want to go to Councillor Gordon just to check if you have a question or comments, or you're happy with what you've heard.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Dave Leach, Councillor Daniels and officers. The contributions have been extremely helpful, so thank you. So would you like to make any summary or comments before you leave the meeting?
Just to thank you for inviting me, really, and inviting us. I mean, it's a very helpful process. I genuinely find this Scrutiny Committee one of the most effective that I've been part of. I used to be on it myself, do miss it. But yeah, just thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Free to leave.
Thanks very much.
Members, can I please remind you that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and still being webcast. Can I refer you now to the scrutiny activity and invite you to offer your recommendations? I would like to hand over to Rebecca, who will formulate the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can just remind the committee of what your scrutiny activity was for today. So the Adults and Communities ONS Committee has been invited to review the information contained within the report and appendices, and to firstly to assess the impact that the IAA has had on the support that residents receive, to determine whether our proposed approach for care management will align with and integrates well with our new early intervention and prevention and information advice and assistance services, and then to make recommendations to the Executive Member for Adult Services and Housing on areas for further consideration and development. So if I can hand over to members to formulate any recommendations or thoughts you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In light of the information we received during the questioning process about that 60% target, I'm just wondering whether or not it's possible for that missing information to be inputted so that we can see where we are exactly at this point in time, or whether that would be more appropriate to leave to Q2. And will it be inputted by Q2, basically? So.
Are you okay if I have that to be action sheet then? So if I get you a confirmed figure and then they will include that then in their further reporting for you. Is that okay if I that way? Or
that would be fine. It just seems that was really quite vital information that we received, that there is a gap at the moment that isn't reflected within the current stats.
Perhaps we could phrase that as a recommendation that we support the inclusion of the non-counted data to make sure it's a more accurate reflection of the IA work.
The situation on the ground, yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you to Councillor Williams.
Yeah, that's great. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, it's more on the lines that if they can come back to the committee, because at the moment this is going to be a new process, so probably recommend that they come back to us within a certain time period to see whether our questions have been answered and it is successful going forward. Like I said, they're only implementing it tomorrow, so it's early days yet. So that's the question I would sort of put.
Obviously, you'll have the update on recommendations that you receive annually. So at the end of the year, you will have an opportunity to revisit now what your recommendations are and your points. And then also it may be something that you want to consider at Vision in then next year to look at its implementation then and how that has worked through.
Just to say, I think in relation to the first thing you read there, X, I think we are reassured that it is starting to work, and I think that's an important message from what data has been received. And I think we also support the work that they're looking to do to better use data to inform trends, which I think was the question 3 bit, to better fit the service to the need, something along those lines. They recognised they were doing some good work, but they needed a bit more to do.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, if I could just quickly come back on Councillor Williams' point there, because I did note that one down as well, I think, following on from question 12, and Dave mentioned that they weren't yet confident about the flow of data into the community as well, so expand on that point together, yeah.
If I could come in on that, the other thing was also, which I made a note of in the question 5, I think we would encourage them to continue monitoring caseloads to make sure they don't go above the levels that they are at present, and hopefully the change will see some reduction. Just something on those lines, because it was quite high, the caseload, I thought.
Councillor Haller.
Hello. Your diversity team, they've got a new team coming up, and they're also talking about the changes of the team and how they're actually acting with that. So is there a question on how they can continue to support neurodivergent people with the new team, and to give us a kind of a report on that? And is there any reason why we can't ask for a seminar based on what they're actually doing for neurodivergent people within Torvine?
So, obviously, the first point you made there, Councillor Hall, is more of a question. So, are you able to sort of reframe that into a recommendation, and then perhaps your point about the seminar?
Yeah, to come back to the committee about the new team and what they're going to do within that new team they talk about, and also to broaden the highlight of neurodivergency within the team to members in a seminar.
I think related to that, and I think I try to get that across, I think we're very supportive of them setting up a transition team and direct and focused support to neurodivergence.
Yeah, no, that's the bang on the money, Dave. That's what I really want to say, yeah. Yeah, and my next one is that we're talking about how we monitor the quality in within the community provision. Some recommendation on coming back to the committee to ask about how they're getting on with that, because some communities don't embrace as much as other communities, and the provision that we have within it.
Also related to that, I might, Chair, there was a bit about, I think maybe there's a recommendation about ensuring there is a good link with the community teams.
And the councils and the community.
And community councils and organisations to get the best set of data to meet needs and sustain people in their communities. I haven't phrased it very well, but I think it's about trying to get the community intelligence in as well, which I think it was referring to.
Yeah, no, very much so. Come on. Thanks.
Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got two things that I'd just like to maybe pass it by the committee, see if they can see a recommendation here. The first was about the data on demographics. They've acknowledged how important that is. Would it be possible for that to be reflected in future reports, and whether that would be an action, Rebecca, or whether or not we could turn that into a recommendation, that it is included in some sort of form where it is clear what the demographic breakdown is. And the other one was, it was Councillor Williams's point about the redesign being completed without requirement for additional resources, and I was very taken by his point that additional one-off staff training, increased training budget for the year may potentially have a benefit, so that ongoing training can be more baked in, rather than facilitated through normal channels.
Thank you, Councillor Clarkson. Yeah, I've noted those.
Picking up on Councillor Evans's point, I think we'd recommend perhaps that there is ongoing monitoring around the staffing and staffing absence as a reflection of how the new system is becoming embedded. I think you made a very helpful point, Steve, about sort of looking at ensuring that the quality of service isn't compromised by the expectation seems to be that bigger teams would give more resilience, but I think you need to monitor that, don't you, to see if it does actually happen.
That's lovely. Councillor Nick Horler.
Yeah, going back on Linda's comments, that was really poignant. The idea that the demographics shows that there are areas within the communities that are affected more. How is the team going to actually put resources into those areas to put them back on par with the rest of the average of the communities, if that makes sense? If they're looking at a bad area that's really bad because of A, B, C and D, how are they going to act on that to resolve those issues to increase it back to the average across the borough?
So I think that's more of a question, though, Councillor Horler, unless...
Again.
Yeah, sorry.
I think a recommendation that they look at in depth more of the areas that are falling behind in other areas and act with resources to make it better. Is that not a question?
If I may, I think it's making sure that they're monitoring the data on as they intend to break down across community council areas to ensure that if there is any level of inequality, it is being addressed.
Yes, thank you, David.
if I could, perhaps, it was also picking up on the point that you asked, Catherine, which was about the learning of the redesign. Perhaps make sure that they take the appropriate time to introduce, to allow for staff engagement and absorption, learning lessons from IA. Which was, doing it at Christmas was not a good idea. I think you know what I'm getting at, but I think they've learned that lesson, but I think we can reinforce it.
Any other recommendations? No.
I will formulate those, thank you, members, and send them out to you for your approval before they then get forwarded to the executive member for responses. Thank you.
Can I just say, I think the committee did a great job here, and Chair, excellent. We managed to get through a lot of questions in a focused way.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Can we do this again another time, please?
Agenda item 6, item for the next meeting. Rebecca, could you introduce the item for the next meeting report, please?
Thank you, members. So this is the item and report to consider what issue you will be looking at your next meeting. So you will see from the appendices you've got the basket of items that you've selected at your visioning session, and you will see there that the item you've selected was the major third sector grants, and that the key question was scoped around policy development and will the recommendations for redesign of the third sector major grant system effectively align to the advice, assistance and prevention requirements in each of our communities. Other items that have since come up are listed on the exec forward plan, which is the strategic housing partnership, and then an audit report has since come in this time period, which is regarding temporary accommodation long-term crisis, which again is a housing item. But with regards to the exec forward plan and that audit committee referral, you will see that there is a housing demand item that you've selected at visioning in your work basket later in the year. So over to you, members. Are you happy to still take the major third sector grants item, or would you like to make any proposals for change?
Councillor Evans?
Yeah, I got to be careful because I'm involved in it. Because like I'm the chair of the Thornhill Community Association, so I have a lot to do with the major third sector grant funding and everything with the borough. So I'd have to be careful what I say and what I do. So.
Yeah, I think it follows quite well from what we've just discussed in terms of the community support element and appropriate targeting of grant funding that can help. So I would suggest that it is a good one for us to do. It may be that we consider the housing into January, possibly, I don't know, just making that suggestion, changing further down the year, but sticking with grants for this one.
Yeah, I think with it being policy development, it seems a timely intervention for us to look at it at scrutiny at this point before it becomes policy recommendation.
Okay, thank you everyone. Okay, agenda item 7, date of next meeting, but I would just like to thank you all for your attendance and contributions today. As Councillor Williams said, I think it's been an excellent scrutiny committee. So to confirm, the next meeting of this committee will be Thursday, the 13th of November at 10 a.m. So I will see you all then. Enjoy the rest of your day.
No,